Look at verse 17. This is where we find him with the pigs. And interestingly enough, this is where this boy finds himself. Literally. Here's what it says. And when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? Why I say he found himself here is because now he's finally come to his senses. After years of partying and living it up. In fact, the story tells us riotous living is the term that he uses. He finally now comes to his senses. And this portion of the story is definitive for us. It is spiritually insane to leave God. Spiritually insane to leave the only one who can give you salvation. This boy says to himself, now he's finally come to himself, I perish for hunger. His previous state had been one of delusion if now he comes to his senses. He thought that the money would be enough, and it was not. He thought that the many friends that he had because of the money would be enough, and it was not. He thought that the freedom would be enough, and it was not. He thought that the wine and the fun and the partying and all the shiny falsehoods of the world would be enough, and he was wrong. And when he finally comes to his senses, he says something incredibly insightful. The end of verse 17, here's what he says. How many hired servants of my father's have bread enough to spare, and I perish with hunger? He believes that his state is that he is perishing with hunger. I don't have the things that I need. I'm surrounded by pigs and filth. No one can or is willing to really help me, and I can't get by on my own. I perish with hunger. I'm starving to death. If I don't do something about this, he has to be saying to himself, eventually I will die. That's his predicament. That's his reality. But the spiritual lesson that this points out for us is remarkably unnerving. If you are disconnected from God, no matter what you're doing, where you are, if you are disconnected, sure as I'm standing here today, if you remain there, eventually you will die. Amen. That's what this boy comes to grips with. I'm going to die if I stay here. He isn't saying, boy, I really miss the party. Boy, I really miss all those people. He's not even saying, boy, I miss my father. The life and death reality comes into play here. If I stay here in this filth, I will die. And for you and I, we must think this very same way. If we stay with the influences that surround us, it's possible we will die. If we stay with that addiction that has gnawed at our life for years, eventually we will die a spiritual death. It's amazing the small things that we allow to stand between us and the salvation through Jesus Christ. And if we stay there with that thing, eventually we will die. But here's what happens to him. He decides, I don't want to die. I'm going to do something about this. And so he looks at his situation. The fog is cleared a little bit, and he says, well, I don't want to die. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back home. And he makes that act, he makes that decision, he chooses that action based on the fact that he's just not going to accept this anymore. And there's some sins, and there's some influences, and there's some things that we take into our minds and into our body. There are places we like to be. There are things we like to taste. There are things that pleasure our senses in many ways that we refuse to give up. And we're going to have to do what he's done. Make an honest assessment of where you are. Are you okay where you are? Because he asks himself, am I okay? these pigs, feeding them and being envious of what the lowest of the low is eating. Can you be okay with that? Are you okay with the influences that surround you? Are you okay with the habits that you have? Are you okay with where you're going? This young man was not. He says, that's enough. No more for me. I will arise. Action. I'm going to do something about this. I will go to my father and I will confess. He starts to prepare now what he's going to say to Daddy when he gets back home. I will confess to him that I've wronged him and that I'm not worthy to be there. I'm going to go back home. Let's take a look at what happens when he gets there. You know, there's some of us who don't believe we deserve to go back home. We've gone too far. We like the idea. And when we see other people, those people should make it, no matter what they've done. But because I've gone so far, I don't really deserve. Nobody knows who I am. I'm really, really, really the worst one in the room. And so I don't deserve really to go back. Satan, in his bag of tricks, has one thing called guilt. Boy, this thing will keep you out of heaven like that. Don't buy it. Don't take it from him. Don't take it from him. If this boy decided, I feel too guilty to go forward, he would die in his sins, just as he predicted. And he says, even though I don't deserve to, he's still my daddy, and I'm going home. And even though you feel you may not deserve it, in fact, no one deserves it. Jesus Christ, God the Father, still your daddy, and you can go back home. Now, that's just the first half of the return. He comes to his senses, he says, wife, I got to get out of here. I got to do better than this. So he turns around and he starts to head home. Now, what the son does and what the father does in the story is what makes the story of the prodigal son worth reading. You see, we call it the prodigal son, but it's not at all about the prodigal son. This story is about the father of the prodigal son. The son makes a change in direction, but what the father does makes the change worth it. If you've ever questioned what God would do if you were to go back home to him, question it no more. Your God is a God of compassion, a God of love, a God who's looking forward to the change that you want to make. And when you make the change of direction, his reaction to you makes that effort worth it. You know, it's an awful feeling when you humble yourself to someone, you turn to them and you admit that you're wrong, and they turn to you and they mistreat you. That ever happened to you? Mm-hmm. Awful, awful feeling. It causes you not to really want to humble yourself to people after that anymore. It brings about a larger feeling of shame. And after a while, it can affect your relationships with everybody, where you don't say sorry, or you don't say the things that you want, and it stifles your relationships because of your expectation of people. And one of the unfortunate things is that we can expect that from Jesus Christ, that he's going to be like everybody else. But my friends, understand something. You can go back home because your God is a God of compassion, a God of love.